begin with our idea talk 1. And yeah, so our topic for this session will be UX UI design introduction and how to build engaging products. Yeah, and our speaker for today is Radhika Agrawal, and I would like to share some brief about Radhika. So Radhika is a service and experience designer, and she has completed her master's in service design from Royal College of Arts in London, and she is currently based in Singapore. And Radhika has worked as a service designer on various projects for Grab, ThoughtWorks, Curb London, Higher Thoughts Limited, and she has also studied her graphic design from Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, and she is also a active member of IDA, Team IDA. Yeah, so I think so. I would request Radhika, you can proceed with your presentation. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, hello.
Sandeep, need to just share, allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Before I start, maybe I'd just like to know how many of you are familiar with, design as a methodology or are designers. Like, I'd like it if everyone could just come off their cameras and just maybe, raise their hands. It's always nice to see people as well. So, um, yeah, would anyone like to just come off the camera and just show their hands if they're designers or have a design background?
Yeah,
Okay, great, great. Okay. Okay, then I'll just start. So what we'll be
yeah.
looking at today is, introducing design to aspiring designers as well as people who might have some knowledge as well about design on how to build engaging products. So my background, as Sandeep has very nicely mentioned, I'm from a graphic design background and now I'm a service designer as well. And design to me is not just what you see, but it's also what you feel. In that sense, I also love to call myself a people designer because I believe in designing with people and not just for them. So this is what led me to explore other areas of design as well beyond graphic design. So today I'm going to be talking about the breadth of design and the micro aspects as well and how we can build more engaging and user-centric products. So our session is in 4 parts. So the first part would, as I mentioned, be talking about the introduction of UI and UX design. And then we'd be taking a short break for you guys to sink in and digest whatever we've told you. And also it's a short space for you guys to ask any questions and for us to just have a chat. So for this aspect also, if you do have any questions during my session, just put it down in the chat below. And then during the break, you can just come off the chat and come off mute and we can just have a good discussion. After that, for the part 2, I'd be going through a case study that's based on my final project during my master's and show how it could relate to the aspects in part 1. And then the floor is all yours and it's your time to ask whatever you want at the end. So what is user experience and user interface, and what are the crucial differences? So just remember that whatever we're going to go through are basic guidelines that can help you transition into design, but often they have overlaps as well because as designers we work collaboratively and not in silos. So before going on to defining UI and UX, I think even as a designer myself or non-designers, there's often myths about UI and UX. First one being, we have the perception that UX designers only design touchscreens and interfaces, especially in these times of technology and a rising technology, or that design is only about making something look good or even better. But honestly, it is a learning journey. And each time you create, you adapt, keeping the user at the center. Ideally, it should also start with the problems that the users or your clients might face, and that's why they approach designers. But even in that process, many times in my own experience, the problem that I start with, at the end, it turns out to be something else. So I don't know how many of you have experiences in your own projects, but this shows us that it is essential to understand what the user needs. But it is also our responsibility to not just ask them, but dig deeper and get more information out of them, to really define their true needs, which we often forego. So UX design, also known as user experience design, was established in 1995 by Don Norman, Apple's then user experience architect, as well as a famous psychologist. Today, it is widely recognized as UX design. In essence, this is about designing the end-to-end experience and journey with the product or a service. It does not just stop at interfaces, but also looks at how that interface or service is being perceived by the audience. And most importantly, understanding if it is even the right intervention for that user. On the other hand, UI or user interface focuses more on the micro aspects. It is the very thing that helps us communicate this hard work, this concept, this idea that we have generated with our target audience. It is the visual language, it is even the typography, the font. It focuses on what the user sees and the interactions they have with the product or service. I often find it very hard to like if I ask you to define user interface or user experience, it's quite difficult to say it as a sentence. We often remember them through keywords. So these keywords can go a long way. UX is a holistic umbrella that looks at the macro aspects as well as micro aspects. So part of it is to do user research, empathy mapping, where you actually really get in touch with the user, maybe put yourself in their spaces and try to understand what they really need. And then you can also create user scenarios. So sometimes it's very hard for us to, put ourselves in their place. So we try to imagine what they might feel, and we may do storyboarding, for example, and that helps us then test and prototype our ideas as well. Likewise, UI designers love to get into the depth of important details, such as layouts, the color, the wireframes, and other overall visual designs. Try to understand these rather than memorizing them, because they are only a framework to guide you with the methodologies. Because sometimes it is difficult to communicate, design aspects to non-designers or even designers or clients. So use these as guidelines, but don't necessarily just memorize them. In a nutshell, user experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. And user interface is the aesthetic appearance of the device, which includes the content that is presented with colors, fonts, and the design style. I always go back to this example. I'm sure everybody knows Uber. In Singapore, another very popular app, a service for this is Grab. And Uber is a ride sharing service combined with a product. So what I really like about this is that it's such a seamless experience. You almost feel like you don't really have to do much, you book a cab, you get into the car, and that'll drop you off at the destination. And in that entire process, you tend to have conversations, organic conversations with someone you probably never expected to. And honestly, a lot of the times when I've actually sat in an Uber or a ride sharing service, I get so much guidance from the drivers, for example, and it's really unexpected and surprising. And the rest just happens with a touch of a button. So simplicity is key for a great experience. Uber is constantly developing itself for the users and for its commuters. A key is adapting to the behaviors of its changing users to keep up with the evolving market. And when it comes to their app, I think it's quite intuitive and easy to understand. In that sense, clarity is also very important. At the same time, remember that a product should not end up informing the consumer's behavior, in the sense where you don't sort of create something that is forcefully, that's forced on your consumer, but rather be user informed to understand what they really need, such as Uber, which might have been a completely disruptive model at once. So I'd say that, I have defined UX, and UI, and we have a fair understanding of it. But an essential aspect to remember while we are doing these, while we're carrying out these methodologies, these disciplines, is to be user-centered as well. Because at the end of the day, we are always designing for people, or at least, creating services for them. So it is really important to consider the various factors that cannot be neglected, especially as we design for people. No matter what we design or produce, even as a non-designer, we have to consider the other factors in the ecosystem, such as technology and the business itself. The goal here is to achieve that sweet spot, which leads to delivering impact and value for everyone. Our goal is to provide a value to target users and also meet business goals while making sure it's supported by back-end processes. So it's almost trying to design like a foolproof service, from the tech side, from the business side, for the people, the investors who are actually investing in your business as well. Really realizing the value for each and every stakeholder. I think design was a very individual aspect a long time back, but now it is really about looking at how do you, provide value to everyone, to your client, to your user, um, even to an investor, for example, or even to the middleman who comes in between getting your service out to your users. If there's no value outcome for users, then there's no value being pumped back into the business. And I think it's high time we realize this as well. And given the current situation, during this pandemic that has changed the course of all our lives, some companies have seen it as a downward slope. For example, Airbnb, have lost their space in the market today. But some also see it as an opportunity to innovate and find their space in the market. Various businesses are surprisingly becoming more resilient. For example, this is a service in Singapore. So Fair Price is a largely known supermarket in Singapore, and they designed a service called Fair Price on Wheels. So what this does, as you can see, is deliver goods and groceries to people via transport, to the comfort of their homes. And in essence, it's a really simple idea, but you have to go out there and do it. And they've taken advantage. They've seen the current situation, the current COVID situation that's going on, and they've understood and adapted towards it. And when you think about who this might be useful for, obviously it's useful for all of us. But trying to understand within the ecosystem who else is there, what sort of audiences are there. So there are like youngsters, there are students, but there are also elderlies who are at stake, who are at much higher risk than all of us. And for them to actually go out to a supermarket, get groceries, actually see more people and interact with more people is not safe at all. So this sort of a service is really, really applicable and useful for them and for their health and for their safety. The next one, I kind of saw this a few days ago on TV, and I was really impressed by this. I was so surprised, and I was like, wow, like it's such a simple intervention. So this I would say is like beds on the move. So this came about in India due to the lack of beds available for the growing number of corona patients. Aryan Paper Group came up with a simple and easy to construct solution: cardboard beds. They are very easy to move around and can hold up to 200 kgs, as you can see on the right side. Just imagine how simple this solution is, and how it allows for beds to be ready in minutes to help save more lives. So these are the things I'm, talking about. It's not just looking at, hey, let's design an app or a website, but it's also looking at the more physical and tangible aspects of a service. For example, this bed, which has such a huge impact, and you can actually see it happening. So remember that design is not just for designers. Like I've had several experiences where I've worked with consultancies and they've been like, oh yeah, but we can't do this, we're not designers. But I think design is a creative process, and it doesn't just you're not just a designer if you actually study design or if you've done design, but it's embedded in everyone, that imaginative creative process. We have to make the most of what we have, create from it, and think of the best to worst case scenario. John Romano says that we are living in an attention economy. If you don't deliver a valuable experience and valuable information to your user at every moment, they are going to disengage from you. And there are a lot of different options in the marketplace. So it's essential that your user experience gets it right. So we've talked about the more theoretical part, the more creative part of it, but how do you actually bring this to life? What is that one rule, that helps you with the journey of designing something and navigate to achieve a good user experience? So these are primary steps. Again, in as a service designer, there is something else called the double diamond process. And when I joined my course, I was, like it was like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go buy this because this is the best way to do it. But again, the design life cycle can be different for everyone. But for my project, this is what it looked like. I think it's really important to empathize with your stakeholders firstly. And when I talk about stakeholders, it's not just your end users, but it is actually your clients. And in my case, it was the council that we were working with to understand their pain points, their problems, their feasibility, how much money can we invest in something. Those are the aspects you have to consider. And then together with them, it is about defining the problem, clarifying the problem, and then identifying your opportunities. Um, Thirdly, it is very, very important to ideate. Now, what I mean by ideating is, we can definitely think about brainstorming, we can come up with ideas, but it is important to do it with your stakeholders. And as you can see there, it looks very much like a Zoom sort of interface here. And this is because my project, halfway I had to come back to Singapore and I was working on it remotely. So it was quite challenging, but it was also really, it was really liberating and interesting. Um, and then the second last one is to prototype. Now you can see that there are like, sketchy wireframes there. And this is very much about co-creating and narrowing down your ideation process and understanding what your service could look like with your users. And lastly, it is really important to test it because you're not always going to get it right the first time. So these are snapshots of my final project. And in the second half, I will be sharing a more in-depth version of it. So do stay on. As we continue to test our ideas, we need to understand how feasible or meaningful the service or the product could be. I often do question myself in the design process. How do I know my design has value? How do I know what I'm doing has impact? Because a lot of the times design is tangible, but it's also very intangible. This is when measuring the value or touch points of our touch points or interaction points becomes very crucial. Heuristic evaluations is a usability measure method which involves having a small set of evaluators examine the intuitiveness and ease of using an interface and product user experience. So what this means is that we have a set of measuring methods which help us understand, the intuitiveness and the accessibility to an interface or the experience that a person might feel. These heuristics are based on years and years of research and testing conducted by professionals on software interfaces that helps UI designers find the most common mistakes while designing user interfaces. Now you can see that they have mentioned UI designers here, but it's not just applicable to UI designers. As I mentioned, a lot of things cuts across silos, cuts across different disciplines. So these heuristics can be used for different disciplines as well. Again, remember that design is always evolving. So do remember to keep creating and use these as guidelines and not a formula. So let's look at some of them. Let's look at point number 3, user control and freedom. Personally, this is very important to me. It's very close to how I design my services as well, or how the mindset that I take to design things. When we create solutions, sometimes it is important to leave room for flexibility in the hands of the user. So let me give you an example. When I was working on my final project, we were looking at isolation amongst old people, and we were looking at the services that have been designed by competitors. So again, that's another thing, which is like when you know that something already exists, how do you put yourself, how do you make yourself stand out of that space? So you really have to try to understand and get into the mindset of your competitors as well. So I actually went online and I tried to, be an older person and try to like just go with the navigation of the website, register for it, answer all the questions that were required to see how much freedom does a user have. And honestly, the seniors don't have much freedom in that sense, because it's just a regular every weekly sort of call that they attend with their volunteers. So I think it's really important to let some of that experience be in the hands of the users, because that's how they create their unique experiences. And this also helps establish a communal form of trust and openness with them. Also, looking at point number 2 and 8, design does have to be aesthetic. Of course, it has to be beautiful to an extent, but remember that it also has to be usable. So you need to make sure that it matches the system and the real world. In the coming future, there will be a more detailed session for the heuristics measure. So seriously, don't worry if you don't get it all at once. So I often ask myself, is there such a thing as good design? Is there such a thing as, oh, I've done it perfectly? This is definitely a go-to in the market. Um, but good design is a culmination of many, many factors. It varies from time zone to time zone, encouraging innovation, because users, tech, and behaviors are always on the move, always evolving. Designers have to consider the current behavior of their users, the market that they're working in, but also look at how that might change towards the future. And this is where innovation happens. Like if you think about it, no one would have thought that we'd be sitting at home today, not being able to go out, having to wear masks, everywhere we go. And a lot of services, as mentioned, have failed to adapt themselves to the current situation. So it's always important to be a little speculative and look into the future as well. Good design should also be useful. Change is constant, and it also affects the aesthetic of design as well. So as you can see, there's a Nokia phone here and an iPhone. In the past, it was a norm to use phones with the tiniest screens, those yellow screens, and push buttons as well. And for us, this was okay. We were okay with the look and feel of it because we had nothing to compare it with. But today, we use touchscreens with larger interfaces and speed that really, really matters. Um, Understandability. This goes again with the usefulness and the usability of a service. Um, if your audience or your users are not able to understand your product without you having to explain too much about it, how will they connect with it? You want your audience to be able to resonate with what you've made for them, to know that it's to make them feel special, to make them feel like you have thought about them as well. And for that, it needs to be very, very understandable. And in a sense, if you look here, you have two watches. It's literally, the information is the same, but both of them tell the time. But the way we deliver it, and the way it's represented has changed over time. So some things don't necessarily change information wise, but the way you display it, again, when you look at the UI, it changes a lot. Good design should also be thorough. So in the 1900s, scientists developed the first X-ray machine to dig even deeper to solve what they couldn't see with their bare eyes. And in a sense, that's what design is. Today, consultations can happen anywhere at any time. And this is so, so important given the current situation we are in, because less and less people have access to physically seeing a doctor. And even though they have it, they're afraid of doing it. So this makes it much easier for a larger audience to access medical care as well, especially as we all stay at home. One of the other things that I personally believe in as well is that design needs to be sustainable. This could be in terms of looking at how you look into the future of your products needing to be sustainable. But if you look at it from a different angle as well, I'm talking about how you can utilize what already exists to help you gain knowledge to address your future designs. So for example, if you see on the left, you have tin homes, and this is even today, a lot of people live in tin homes, but it was more widely used in the past. And on the right side, this is a project, this is a speculative project that's being done in Egypt, where they look at how you can render the future of old buildings. So just imagine how you could build on what you already know, appreciate the history of where things come from, and really understand how to appreciate the culture of things and the history of things as well. And lastly, nature is a reflection of what's good as well. Looking more broadly and in terms of design, less is more. With the onset of the COVID, we see carbon emissions reducing dramatically in China, for example. And from too many people to less people now, nature is finally healing. You can look at it in the negative sense as well, where a lot of us have cut ties, have dramatically cut social ties as well. We're spending more time with ourselves, which is great. But on a larger scale, on a more macro level, nature is also actually healing. Just like that, we need to allow for breathing space to exist in what we design. So in short, good design is informed by these 10 evaluators: being innovative, useful, aesthetic, unobtrusive, understandable, honest, long-lasting, thorough, sustainable, and as little design as possible. We thank Dita Rams for his inspiring evaluators that have helped so many designers construct the right path, or perhaps sometimes even the wrong path, because you never get it right the first time. In my opinion, good design is really learning how to dig deeper to solve what can't be seen with our bare eyes. It is being able to identify the gaps in between what sometimes it feels like it has to follow a certain structure or methodology. But honestly, I mean, try seeing good design as not a mandate, but as something that is intuitive. You know, uh, Otherwise, it's very hard to find your unique space as a designer as well. Our thoughts, the way we think, sometimes we just have to be experimental because that's what our gut says. And I think if Steve Jobs had just followed what already exists, he would have never designed what all of us are using today. So really, sometimes you have to go with your gut. Sometimes you have to get it wrong. You have to be experimental as well. So thank you very much. That was the first part of our session. I'd like you to sink it in, and really just register whatever we've talked about. Go for a 5 minutes break if you want, and for those who'd like to ask questions, please stay on.